Feeding babies and children a nutrient-dense ancestral diet is something that many moms have questions about. Whether the questions are, how do I start my child off on the right foot? Or, I have older kids and we are just coming to this ancestral diet now. Help, how do I transition them to this good food? These are things that we think about. Here to help us today is Christine Muldoon from the Modern Ancestral Mamas Podcast. Christine and her co-host Corey were on our podcast a long time ago, episode number 27, and Christine is back to give us more of her great wisdom for feeding children. Topics today range from breastfeeding and the Weston A. Price formula to connection at the table and during mealtime. When do you start bringing children to the table? Why that timing is so important, to picky eating and family food values, and so much more. This is a wonderful conversation. Alison and I both enjoyed visiting with Christine so much. And patrons, be sure to hit your private podcast feed for short after show with Christine. Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen. Good morning, Alison. Or afternoon,
Hi,
Alison.
Andrea. Yeah, good afternoon. Good morning to you.
It's not just you and me here today.
No, indeed. We have another wonderful guest.
We actually have a return guest. Have we had any returns yet? Is this our first?
We love her so much. No, I think she's our first. I think
Hi,
you're our
look
first,
at that.
Christine. Oh.
So, Christine, you were so popular, we had to have you back.
Wow, that's really cool. Sorry.
Christine is amazing, and I don't even remember how we connected. I guess on Instagram, probably, right?
Yes.
And she has been on the podcast before. If you jump back to one of our earlier episodes, I'll put it in the show notes so you can find the actual link to it. But it was questions with ancestral mamas. And Christine has an amazing outlook on food and children and weaning and transitioning children into ancestral foods and all the things that I know our listeners are very curious about all the time. So this is the perfect fit. So welcome, Christine. Very happy to have you here.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I can't believe that I am your first repeat guest. You guys have had such incredible guests on your podcast.
Thank you.
It's amazing who we get to talk to. I love
for
it.
sure. I know, so I actually think that's how I found both of you. Is I must have stumbled upon you, I think either first on Instagram and then started listening, or vice versa. And I loved the sort of the atmosphere that you guys have on your show. It's just very calming and soothing, and your guests are fascinating. And yeah, I've loved your show always.
Wow, that's so kind of you to say.
We love yours too.
Yeah, I was going to say, we love your show too, obviously, because we said, please, can you be on ours too? And your podcast is Ancestral Mamas. Well, I'm going to have you actually tell us a little bit about that. But first, let me ask you what we ask all our guests. What is the last thing you ate before we hopped on to record?
So it is morning for me as well. And so that breakfast, and on Fridays is my I don't want to cook day. So at least for breakfast, nice. I don't want to make anything complicated. So Fridays for us are usually either yogurt and granola or cottage cheese and granola or a smoothie. And so today I had a smoothie. And when I make my smoothies, I usually add about 4 or 5 raw egg yolks, raw cream, either kefir or yogurt, depending on what I have available, colostrum, and maybe any frozen fruit that I have, sometimes chia seeds, sometimes probiotics, sometimes, what else have I put in there before? Depending on the flavor profile, sometimes I'll add a little bit of raw honey or maple syrup. But yeah, so I just had a smoothie, nothing too fancy.
Delish. I love it. Well, tell us, in case anybody listening hasn't gotten familiar with your work yet, tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about what you do.
Yes, I'd love to. So I am a nutritional therapy practitioner, and my work focuses on specifically families with kids, small children. I absolutely love helping first-time moms that are starting solids with their babies. I would say that's like my absolute favorite thing to work with. And I like to support moms and families as they are transitioning to solids, but also I will work with any families struggling with picky eating or mealtime issues, or just families that aren't sure how to transition over to a more nutrient-dense diet, anything within that parameter. And oftentimes my work involves a lot of like parent coaching. And yes, we talk about nutrition, but also do a lot of parent coaching and things like that. And I have a podcast with my co-host Corey Dunn, and it's called the Modern Ancestral Mamas. And we basically are trying to bridge the gap between modern motherhood and the ancestral lifestyle. So that's a little bit of what I do.
I already know that everybody just grabbed a notebook and they're ready to listen, because all those things you said are things we get questions about all the time. And some of the questions that we have today, actually, most of them were sent in by patrons of our podcast, things that they have questions, burning questions on. And some of them are topics that you go into much more deeply on your podcast. So if people jump over to Modern Ancestral Mamas and add that to their queue, you'll see real food for pregnancy and gestational diabetes on there. And I saw that you had starting solids just in October. You did the episode. Just lots of really good episodes on there that you will go more deep dive into some of these things we're going to cover. So super awesome resource.
Yeah, thank you.
If you've been around ancestral food for 10 minutes, you know liver is a superfood. You're looking at a food packed with vitamins A, K, a broad spectrum of B vitamins, CoQ10, bioavailable iron, plus many essential minerals and more. Liver is your first stop when seeking to gain energy and restore your health. Not only is it a delicacy and staple of traditional diets, it's the first thing most animal predators go for when hunting. Are you looking for a good way to work liver into your daily life, but getting it on the table just isn't happening yet, or as much as you'd like? This is where liver capsules come in. Alison and I are both supplementing our ancestral diets with liver capsules from One Earth Health. We get all the incredible benefits of liver, even when we're on the road or preparing non-liver meals for our family. And the sourcing and preparation has all been handled for us. One Earth Health produces nutritious organ capsules from 100% grass-fed New Zealand-raised cattle. Support the pod by purchasing through our link, and you'll also get 5% off and free shipping as a bonus. Go to oneearthhealth.com/ancestralkitchen or check the show notes.
Let's go with the first question. So, as you indicated, your specialty is weaning and kind of going from that age on up. But if you want to just touch briefly on breastfeeding, kind of the role it plays in the start in life and supporting a mother while she's breastfeeding, we would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Totally. I'd love to chat about that. So I just want to kind of like what Andrea said, I want to clarify that my expertise is specifically when babies begin solids and feeding children on up. So pretty much around 6 months and up. I am not personally an expert on breastfeeding, but I can share what I've learned through my nutritional therapy courses and, just a little bit of like research and stuff like that. So I think now most people know that breast is best if that is a possibility for mom. And if it's not, then one of the recommendations that I always give to clients or anyone asking is the Weston A. Price formula. And there's actually 2 formulas in the back of I always call it the purple book. I don't know what the name of it is, but it's the purple Nourishing Traditions book.
I like that.
I think it's the baby and child care book, or the baby and child.
We'll link it so people can see.
Thank you, Alison. The recipe there's 2 of them back there. There is one that is a milk-based formula, and it can be goat milk so raw goat's milk or raw cow's milk. And there's a liver-based formula, and it's liver and broth. I personally know many people that have used both formulas and have had children thrive on them. So if there's any breastfeeding struggles, the first thing I recommend is make your own formula.
I would second that, just to jump in, because I had breastfeeding struggles with Gabriel, very, very, very difficult. And we turned to the Weston Price formula, the milk one, and we used raw goat's milk from a local supplier. And I made that for Gabriel for a very long time. And it worked really well. And it's got a lot of ingredients in, and it seems daunting when you first look at it, but once you get into the routine, it's fine. So yeah, I'd second what you'd said there, Christine.
Yes, Alison, I've heard that a lot as well, that when you first look at the recipe, you think, oh my goodness, this is not possible, I can't do it. But everybody I know that has tried it has said the same thing. You just get in a routine of how to make it, and it becomes second nature, and it's not much more complicated than some of the powdered options that are out there, and 1,000% more nutrient dense. So
yeah, agree.
And we will do anything for our babies. So
yes,
we'll make it happen.
Yeah, definitely.
And could you give a little bit from there to your approach to weaning? And also, I'm curious, do you ever use these formulas, not necessarily as a replacement, but maybe along with breast milk or kind of in the weaning process?
Yeah. So I do want to, yes, I'm going to answer those questions. And I did want to talk just a little bit about the breastfeeding question. So basically...
Oh, yeah, totally. Go wherever makes sense. Yeah.
I wanted to emphasize that I'm not sure what your audience demographic is as far as where they are, but unfortunately in mainstream maternal health, these experts are telling women that pregnancy is the most taxing time on a woman's body, and many women believe this. So oftentimes a woman will think that pregnancy is the hardest thing that their body is going through. And really, the truth is that it's not pregnancy, not to detract from how hard pregnancy can be, but it's actually postpartum and breastfeeding that is the most physically taxing on a woman's body. And I really want to emphasize that, because we sort of only focus on pregnancy, and then once we have the baby, we kind of forget about mom, and we're just focused on keeping the baby happy and healthy, which is very important. And that also includes the mom, and that also includes the mother's health and her nutrition and her emotional well-being. So just to elaborate on that, in the postpartum time, the woman's body she's depleted from pregnancy and all the minerals and the nutrients that went to growing the human being inside of her. She's healing from the pregnancy. And then she also has to produce enough food to sustain a baby. So these are 3 huge factors that all are, into play during the postpartum time. And so this is why the postpartum time is the most physically demanding on a woman's body and her emotions. So, what can we do to support a postpartum mother, and what foods can she eat at that time? I would say things like copious amounts of broth. So just all the broth that you can, the broths, the meat stocks, meat, eggs, cooked foods, cooked vegetables, really warming foods, electrolytes, lots of electrolytes to help replenish her minerals and everything that she needs to be able to produce the milk, staying away from raw vegetables, eating fermented foods, resting as much as possible, things like that. And there's also, in the mainstream media and things like that, there is this misconception that breast milk is perfect and that it doesn't really matter what a woman eats and it won't, breast is best. And yes, that is true. And also it does matter what the mother eats because the food that she eats affects the nutritional quality of her milk. So, and there is lots of well-documented research out there showing that the nutritional content of breast milk is impacted by a mother's diet and her nutrient stores. And I think that's really important too, to emphasize the fact that as women, when we go into pregnancy, depending on how our health was previously, that is going to affect the development of the fetus. That is then going to affect the development of your infant and how much nutritional cash, if you want to say, goes into their formation and their body and their growth and all of that. So it really does matter before you get pregnant, the health of how healthy you and your partner are during pregnancy and postpartum. And if we can, as a society, learn to prepare for pregnancy before we're getting pregnant, then I think the outcomes of the future generation will improve. I just went off on a mini tangent there.
No, it was all really wise. Wow.
Yes. I'm glad you said that because I do feel exactly as you have said that oftentimes the postpartum period is ignored and the nutrition is just kind of assumed. Like you said, whatever milk it is what it is. But we know that we can boost our own contribution to the baby with our food. So that's amazing.
Yeah, there was one really good quote from a research article that I read that talked about how any nutrient deficiency existing in pregnancy will ultimately be carried forward via lactation. So it is biologically impossible for a lactating woman to transfer nutrients via breast milk that she does not have.
Yeah.
So that
is
a big one to think about, guys.
I suppose we could trickle that down to your baby is what you eat.
Well, yes, it is.
So there we go. Well, that's amazing, Christine. And I'm really glad that you shared those thoughts. And I know Alison and I both concur with you in both our personal experience and what we have been studying. Do you want to then give a little
transition over to weaning?
Time to weaning and that period of time?
Yes, I do.
Awesome.
So we touched a little bit on nutrient stores, and around the third trimester and after birth, there is, if you want to call it, a type of download that happens between mother and baby, where mother essentially downloads all of the micronutrient and specifically minerals that baby will need within the first 6 months of life. And this also happens post-birth, right after birth, as the umbilical cord is pulsing. And this is why we want delayed cord clamping, because that's what's happening in that moment, is those nutrients are being transferred from mother to baby, and that's what's going to keep baby's mineral stores at a stable level until approximately 4 to 6 months. So 6 months really. At that time, basically what happens is whatever some of the minerals and nutrients that mom is transferring to baby via breast milk will no longer be enough for baby's rapid development and growth. And so this is why babies wean. This is why traditionally our ancestors knew that around 4 to 6 months, we needed to start introducing solid foods. It's for baby's overall health and development. And research has shown that, ideally this has happened between 4 to 6 months, kind of. And again, it depends on each baby. And there's some pretty standard signs that show developmental readiness for solids. there's 3 basic ones. The first is baby has solid head control, so they can lift their head up unassisted. The second is reaching and grabbing for food. So they're showing an interest in what's on your plate. So if baby is sitting on your lap or you're holding baby while you're eating and they're trying to reach for your foods, that's another sign that they are developmentally ready for solids. And the third is being able to sit unassisted or with minimal support. And this one basically just means that they have strong control, trunk control, to prevent from things like choking. And when it comes to weaning, I believe that it is important to continue breastfeeding, and while you're breastfeeding or formula feeding, whatever you're able to do, introducing solids at the same time. And so there's a very critical time period. It's called the first 1,000 days of life, which is essentially from conception to 2 years of age. And this is when the brain grows more quickly than at any other point in a child's life. And at this point, the developing brain is vulnerable to poor nutrition. So this means that vitamins and minerals like iron, zinc, choline, cholesterol, B vitamins, these are absolutely essential specifically for a baby's developing brain. And if there is a deficiency in these, it can have lasting health outcomes in the future. And so this is one of the reasons why introducing solids is so important. Because at this point, around 6 months of age, mom's breast milk doesn't have enough of those nutrients to sustain the rapid growth that is going on with baby. And so some of the foods that are the most nutrient dense that can help with this growth and development are foods like egg yolk, very high in choline, very high in cholesterol. Cholesterol is necessary for baby's brain, for their body development, for their hormones, everything. Liver, broths, meats, lots of fats as well, animal fats specifically, butter, ghee, lard, fermented foods. Yeah, these are, I don't know if I went too far on.
No, not at all. And you're going into some of the questions that we had from the patrons, and you're answering them kind of already, which is really good. What's your take on baby-led weaning versus purees?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. Okay, so I know it's been a while since I've read the baby-led weaning book. I need to reread it again to refresh my memory. And I know that Sally specifically absolutely despises the baby-led weaning book. I think that there can be a very good marriage of the two methods. And I understand why she despises baby-led weaning. It's because she feels like baby is not getting the adequate nutrition that they need if we're following strict baby-led weaning methods. And I completely agree with that. Because the baby-led weaning book essentially states that you can just feed baby whatever it is that you're eating, and they will learn how to eat. And there is some truth to this, but there's also nuance to it. And one of the issues that I see with this is if a family is not eating nutrient-dense foods from the start, then yes, you can just feed baby whatever you're eating, but they're going to be lacking in some of the vital nutrients that I touched on just a few minutes before. So, and some of these very nutrient-dense foods, I'm thinking liver, egg yolk, bone marrow, those foods are hard to eat without a spoon. Honestly, if we're talking about spoon feeding a baby egg yolk, a baby can't really pick up an egg yolk and eat it. I mean, they could stick their finger in it and lick their finger off, but if we're really focusing on trying to get those valuable foods into their system, the best method is to just spoon feed it to them. So, spoon feeding them egg yolk with a little bit of salt on it, spoon feeding them liver pate, spoon feeding them bone marrow. These foods are gold when it comes to nutritional benefits, and we do want to make sure that baby gets as much as possible into their system. So I think that a combination of the two is the best method to approach feeding baby. And the reason why baby-led weaning is important is because what it does is it helps develop baby's independence and their oral motor skills. So when we are only spoon feeding baby, the baby is not allowed to practice eating, so independently grabbing foods and bringing them to their mouth, exploring what it feels like to have different textures and flavors and sizes of food in their mouth. All of that helps so when babies start eating, I'm going to backtrack a little bit here. They have certain reflexes that are in place to keep them safe. And one of the reflexes that they have is the gagging reflex. And the gagging reflex is typically, for a young baby between 4 and 6 months, is very close to the tip of their tongue. And this is there on purpose to prevent any food going further into the back of the throat and then to cause choking. And as baby gets older, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, 11 months, this gagging reflex moves further back into the mouth, further back on the tongue, until, we're adults. Our gagging reflex is pretty far back on our tongue. You would have to stick something pretty far back to engage that reflex, okay? And one of the important aspects that happens when babies begin learning how to eat is this practice that they do where they're putting things in their mouth. This is why babies put things in their mouth all the time. It's because they're exploring, they want to feel the sensations, and it's the same with food. They need to see what is going to happen when I put a piece of steak in my mouth. How far back can it go before I start gagging? What happens if there's too much food in my mouth? What do I need to do? All of those sensations and working on tongue lateralization are necessary to be healthy and confident and good eaters. And so this is why I do think baby-led weaning has benefits, because it gives baby that practice. And also because when it comes to eating, it is a full sensory experience. So even from the moment we begin to look at the food, our brain is already preparing our digestive system to eat that food just by looking at it. So we want to see what's in front of us. Then we want baby to be able to reach out and grab it and touch it so they can feel it. We want them to be able to bring it to their mouth so they can smell it. This is why they smear it all over themselves. I mean, when we say full of sensory experience, that's what we're talking about. They are really immersing themselves in the eating process. And that is all incredibly necessary for their development.
Yeah, that all makes sense. You know what? I've just been thinking, listening to you talk, I wish I'd been able to listen to you talk 10 years ago before I had Gabriel, because that would have been really helpful. So can I just clarify? I can see how you're saying both are necessary. Would you say that those should be carried on in tandem with breastfeeding?
Yes, I for sure think that you can do both of them at the same time while you're breastfeeding. And often what I'll say to parents is, you want a happy baby when you're sitting down to introduce solids. So I generally recommend offering foods either after a nap. You can feed baby just a little bit from the breast or the formula. Not a lot, but just enough so that they are full and satisfied and they're not going to be starving and angry trying to figure out what this new food is that you've put in front of them.
Yeah, that makes sense completely.
Hey there, thank you for being a listener of the Ancestral Kitchen podcast. It means so much to Alison and I when you post a review on Apple or Spotify, or share about the podcast in your stories, or send us a message and let us know what it means to you, which is hopefully something good. You can also sponsor the podcast through our Patreon account and help Rob buy weird gadgets to edit out my coughs and microphone bumps in the background. We have a variety of different levels you can choose from and a bunch of different benefits you can enjoy, ranging from additional interviews to video content and downloadable goodies. Check it out at patreon.com/ancestralkitchenpodcast.
You mentioned fermented foods a little while ago. Which ferments would you suggest introducing first?
Yeah, sauerkraut. I think sauerkraut is the most basic one to start with, and usually it's a very, very small amount, like 1 teaspoon. And you could spoon feed that. You could just put a little bit in some warm broth and mix it in with the broth and just have them drink it. I think putting broth in bottles, if baby will take a bottle, is one of the easiest ways to give your baby broth. And something that worked really well for me with my children is not only would I add a little bit of sauerkraut juice into the broth, but also if the broth is not too warm, you could add in some egg yolks. I would take liver and puree it. And then, there are hundreds of ways to really up the ante on the nutrition when it comes to serving broth. That's why I think if you can really get that down, offering your baby broth and doing it on a regular basis, there's many different food options that you can add to it. Bone marrow, obviously fats.
Creams. Yeah, I can imagine that. And then you've just suggested fermented food, which is really good. Can we just touch on, I think most parents are aware of the biggest kind of allergen foods, like eggs can be a big allergen, nuts can be a big allergen. You've suggested, introducing egg yolks really quite young. What do parents need to be aware of when introducing these foods? When should they, and what would be a sign that something's wrong?
Yes, those are all great questions. So when introducing allergens, the best way to do it is very slowly, one allergen at a time. Observe baby's response. So you're looking for redness or irritation around the skin, the lips, or the mouth. And also paying attention to food intolerance signs. So this could be redness around the mouth. This could be an abdominal bloating or a distended stomach. Things like constipation, gas, irritability. These are all signs that maybe the food that you offered didn't sit well with baby, or it could be something more. And research nowadays is showing that it's better to introduce allergens at a younger age and slowly. Okay. So as opposed to really just completely avoiding them until baby is older, start on those sooner. And I want to touch on eggs for a second. So egg yolks are not going to contain the proteins that cause allergens. It's the whites. So this is why I recommend sticking exclusively with the egg yolk, and also because it is the most nutrient-dense part of the egg at the beginning. That's what you want to offer baby. And then when baby's a little bit older, maybe around 8 or 9 months, you can try things like an omelet, and you could take the omelet and cut it into long strips so that baby can pick it up and grab it and eat it independently. But you could play around with that. And I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say about eggs.
We can come back to it if you can't remember. You can always just jump in and say, I remember the thing about eggs.
Well, okay, so foods like nuts, for example, we know that nuts need to be properly prepared. And these are very difficult foods for babies to digest. And most babies can't actually eat nuts until about 2 or 3 years of age. Now, I'm aware that oftentimes in some packaged and processed foods, these are just like a byproduct. But yeah, when it comes to certain foods that need to be properly prepared, nuts, grains, legumes, there's a reason why ancestrally these foods were not introduced until later. Baby's digestive system is still developing. It's still very immature. And actually, I'm not sure how many of your listeners know this, but babies are born with leaky gut. It's later on in their childhood that their gut finally seals. And so at the beginning, this is why broth is so important. Yeah. Just really, really emphasizing broths and meats and fats.
Yeah, completely. I can see that. So let's move on a little bit in age of baby. And Nicole, one of our patrons, had a question of the top kind of 5 things, or however many you think is appropriate, of essential things to focus on in children's nutrition in general and the way to get those into their diets. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I would love to. So my mantra is animal meat, animal meat, animal meat, eggs, broths, and meat stocks for proper gut development. Like I said, the fermented foods, so sauerkrauts, kefir, yogurts, for building the gut microbiome. But really, and fat, lots of animal fats. The ghee, lard, butter, tallow, coconut oil, all of these meats, fats, eggs, and broths. That's what I would say. If you feed your child those alone for the next, for the first 2 to 3 years of their life, they will be set up. They'll have a good foundation. And the reason why
that's clear.
I just want to mention a little bit, the reason why we want to focus on animal proteins and animal fats specifically is because some of the individual nutrients that are critical for brain development are iron, zinc, protein, folate, the B vitamins, choline. And all of these are absolutely necessary at that time. And then we have the vitamins like vitamin A. It's necessary for the development and growth of every single organ system in the body. It plays a key role in the development of the cranial and facial features, the dental arches, the sinus passages. Vitamin A, ideally mom is consuming vitamin A pre-pregnancy and during pregnancy. And what foods are high in vitamin A? Liver, organ meats, so liver, kidney, heart, animal meats in general are high in vitamin A. Then vitamin D. Vitamin A and D work together during development, and vitamin D is important for lung development, and it protects against, heart failure and things like the rapid skeletal growth. Vitamin D, getting your baby out in the sun, just having them sunbathe if possible, if that is, a possibility where you live. And also cod liver oil. I completely forgot to mention cod liver oil. Cod liver oil, a lot of fish too. Fish is high in these necessary nutrients. And then there's vitamin K2, which is, necessary for reproduction and infant growth, facial structure. K2 is kind of like the conductor of the symphony. K2 is what tells vitamin A and vitamin D where to go. It supports mental development, neurological health. K2 can be found in fats and some fermented foods and hard cheeses. These are all some of the necessary nutrients that I think are absolutely essential for babies' optimal growth and development.
Wonderful.
That's all super awesome. And I liked your list of foods. That was a great list. I'm pretty sure that our listeners know what you mean, but can I just have you clarify when you say things like nuts, you said, for instance, need to be properly prepared. By properly prepared, you mean people could refer back to Nourishing Traditions and see the manner in which they are treated in that book?
Yes, definitely. So
Perfect.
Yeah, soaking and dehydrating or soaking and sprouting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, because if people were listening, among all the many, many, many foods you listed, I never heard rice cereal come up. So I wonder if you could put just a couple seconds on grain and babies and weaning.
Yes, I'd love to. So as I mentioned previously, grains are actually very difficult to digest, and a baby's digestive system is still immature. It is still developing. The gut lining is still sealing. And when we're talking about conventional rice cereal, not only does that mean it's very high in anti-nutrients like arsenic, but it is not properly prepared, which means that there are compounds in that conventional rice that will bind to some of the nutrients in baby and prevent absorption, essentially. It could cause gut inflammation, and the nutrients that are added to those rice cereals are often fortified, which means they're synthetic and they're added back in. And that's because the original product was stripped of all of those nutrients in order to make it shelf stable. And it's essentially a dead food. It is lacking in nutrients. So to start out baby at such a critical time in their life, where I already mentioned they are literally vulnerable to poor nutrition those first 1,000 days of their life. So to start them out on a nutrient depleting food sets baby back. And, while it's absolutely horrendous that this is a recommendation that your, common pediatrician and practitioners will suggest. But I was actually just having a conversation with a friend a few days ago about how there's a lag time between research and when it actually hits mainstream media and mainstream practitioners and things like that. And apparently there's a lag time of about 17 years. So almost 20 years, science is coming out and saying, this is what's best. There's research studies out there that are proving these things. This is what we need to be doing. And then about 20 years later, finally, mainstream media and practitioners are saying, oh, never mind. We just realized that what we were recommending previously was incorrect. Sorry, we made a mistake. But at that point, you've already had almost, 17 years pass, essentially.
Yeah.
So this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about getting this information out as soon as possible. And I think as parents, sometimes it can feel very overwhelming because we think, well, if I had only started sooner. And instead of thinking I had only started sooner, think I'm going to start today, because today is better than tomorrow. And any small change that you make now will have an impact in the future. And for everybody, this is a journey. There's very few of us that had the privilege of, I guess, maybe inheriting or living out these ancestral practices from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's really nice to emphasize that, because it's so easy for us as parents to kind of be down on ourselves about it, and like you said, we're doing the best. We're on a journey. And whatever we do, the small changes that we do put in place when we learn about them are absolutely wonderful. So thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you say how the babies are so vulnerable to poor nutrition, this is the reflection of how immediately benefited they are by the good nutrition.
Yes.
Because they are literally absorbing everything. So the degree to which we could give harm is the obverse of how much we could give massive, massive benefits, which is really good to know.
Mm-hmm.
So
can I add one more thing? Because Nicole asked for the top 5 essential foods.
Oh yeah.
And I really wanted to talk about connection. It's not a food, but there is an incredible importance to emotionally connecting with our babies and our children so that they feel safe and are open and receptive to eating. And I think that oftentimes this piece is overlooked, especially for those of us in the health and wellness world. We can kind of obsess over the concrete things, foods to feed our kids. That's very objective and easy to measure. And the harder aspect of it is, well, are we connecting with our child? Do we have a deep relationship with them? Do they feel safe and secure in our presence? Is there attachment? Because attachment is key to having a child that is open to eating, that feels safe and in a parasympathetic state so that their body can essentially rest and digest. And so this means minimizing mealtime struggles and making the dinner table, a place for love and connection and conversation. And this begins when babies are starting solids. I really want to emphasize the importance of including baby in your meal times as young as possible. So that infant is, either in your arms or maybe being worn by you, or maybe in a little carrier of sorts. But that baby is at the dinner table from day one, participating in that mealtime experience. And as children get older and as babies get older, and once they are ready to start solids, again, including them in the mealtime with the rest of the family. So we're not feeding babies separate from the rest of the family. We're doing it together, because one of the ways that they learn how to eat is through modeling of their family members. And if this is your first time baby and you're a first time parent, then they are observing the way you and your partner are eating and watching and taking cues and learning. If you have multiple children, they're obviously learning from their siblings, and man, do they pick things up real quick when they have siblings. And then emphasizing the elimination of screens at a mealtime. So put the phones away, put the iPads away, put the TV away. The mealtime is just for the family members, again, to talk, to connect, sing songs, laugh, those kinds of things. Make it...
I think that should go on until they leave home. 20, 25
totally.
years.
Yes, always. It needs to be like that always. I don't have kids that have phones. I don't have any kids in those age ranges. But just even for my husband and I, the rule is, there's no phones at the table while we're eating. And even the kids know that. We're pretty strict about that.
That's awesome. And that is going to help the parents get in a parasympathetic state as well. So everybody wins here.
Yeah.
This is a win-win. Also awesome. I'm loving everything that you're saying.
Bring to mind your kitchen. Now imagine it full of expert women fermenters ready to teach you everything they know. Vegetables, salumi, drinks, kefir, dairy, sourdough, vinegar, koji, and much more. The Fermentation School is just that, online, in your kitchen, whenever you want. World-leading female educators sharing their incredible experience in video courses that will guide you step by step through your next fermentation project. Ancestral Kitchen Podcast has teamed up with the school to offer its 60 plus courses to you at a 10% discount. When you say yes, you'll also be supporting the work Andrea and I do as you skill up. Go check out their courses via the link in the show notes. I'm betting there's something there that's going to get you really excited. Happy fermenting.
So transitioning kids to ancestral foods, what if somebody's listening to this and their kids are not little or in the womb? They're maybe 10 or 15 years old. Can you talk a little bit about picky eaters, how you approach what to offer the children, and just like you said with the phone, modeling your attitudes around the mealtime and food, that kind of window of time?
Yeah. So I'll answer the picky eating question in a bit, but when it comes to transitioning kids to an ancestral diet, first of all, I can completely sympathize with how challenging this can be in today's modern world when we are just inundated with processed and packaged foods everywhere. I mean, sometimes it's shocking how prevalent it is at every turn. So the first thing I would say is, if you have older children, having a conversation with them about it and sitting down as a family to discuss what Corey and I like to call our food family values, and figuring out as a family, okay, what are the foods that are important to our family that we want to prioritize? Which ones are the foods that we believe are less than ideal for growth and health? And how can we avoid those? And having an open discussion with extended family members as well, so that they are aware of your food family values, and then holding boundaries and implementing these. And I do think that holding boundaries is a very important piece to this. And oftentimes parents are afraid to hold those firm lines. But for an example, if as a food family value, your family has decided that you are going to completely avoid artificial colors, then as the parent, it's your job to set that limit and be firm with it. And also, so another way to transition would be to slowly make the foods that your children love, but in a more nourishing way. So if you are a parent whose child is only eating things like macaroni and cheese or chicken nuggets, try making it at home. Make the macaroni and cheese from scratch with better whole, clean ingredients. Make the chicken nuggets at home, and realize that this is a fun little tidbit about picky eating, but the same methods that you use to prevent picky eating are the same methods that we use to reverse picky eating. And really, picky eating oftentimes is about control and is often about expanding a child's palate and widening their palate. So children who are only eating macaroni and cheese and chicken nuggets and, foods like these, just making it at home and not buying the store-bought version, that in of itself will be a massive transition for a child. So starting really small and starting with just one meal at a time, one food at a time, and working their tolerance up to that one new food versus bombarding them with a whole bunch of new foods. And making sure that, this goes along the same lines, but making the foods that your family loves. So oftentimes we tend to think that, if we're transitioning over to quote unquote healthy eating, we can't eat delicious foods. And this is just not the case. The healthy foods that we're eating on a daily basis are absolutely delicious. They're made with all of the things that people deem as villainous. They're made with the fats and meats. And these are foods that the body really craves and needs. So those are some of the suggestions that I have for transitioning kids. As far as picky eating, that could be a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah. We get so many questions on this, literally, and I've seen so many questions on it, so I can imagine we could talk about it for hours.
Well, I did want to ask, because I think we should touch on picky eating a little bit, but what are some of the specific questions that you guys get, so that I know where to direct my...
Yeah. So we've had people saying that, my child will eat ultra-processed foods and that he finds on the floor in playgrounds, and that's all he'll eat at home. We've had people telling us that their children are completely like sugar addicted and they will not eat anything that hasn't got sugar in it. And, I've had experience of not that much with Gable, but a little bit of him choosing, I don't want the liver anymore. For the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years of his life, he ate liver all the time. And now he's like, I don't really like liver unless I make it into a pate. And I don't have time to make it into a pate all the time. And so I think there's the picky eating, as in people are really, really used to ultra-processed foods and they've had them outside the house or they've had them at school. And then when they come into the home and that isn't offered, it just doesn't have the same bang. Our food doesn't have the same bang as ultra-processed food has. Yeah. And then I also think, there's the other side, which is as the children get older, foods that they may have eaten before, they're choosing not to eat them. Does that help you with an answer?
Yeah, no, it does actually. So I have a few thoughts based on what you were talking about. So unfortunately, picky eating is multifaceted. There is not one cause to picky eating. And each child, depending on their own unique situation, could have just one cause or could have multiple causes for picky eating. And so the first I want to talk about is emotional and relationships. And, I touched on connection before, but this is a huge piece to picky eating because this oftentimes falls under the umbrella of control. And if a child is feeling out of control in their life, whether that be and this can be a child of any age, and I'm especially thinking of younger children who maybe don't have the full language skills to be able to express this. But if we're talking about feeling out of control in their life, it could be things like a new sibling, a new school, new teachers, a move, maybe some disconnection between partners that the child is picking up on. Any stressors in the home that could contribute to kind of a negative energy that the child is picking up on. And these sorts of things feel like for a child, they feel like they're completely out of control. So what can they control? Well, there's a few things that they can control. The first is what they eat, because we cannot force our kids to eat. No matter how hard we try, no matter how much we want to, we physically cannot force our kids to eat. So that is their domain, and they have control over that. And so when we're talking about connection and attachment, this is when this really comes into play. If for whatever reason we are feeling out of sorts with our little one, we're not connecting with them properly, we feel like we're butting heads with them, this could be a big reason for picky eating. And oftentimes you can see it with parents. So there will be one parent that has attached to the child and another parent has not. And the child will demonstrate their picky eating tendencies towards the child that they're not, towards the parent that they're not attached to. So I'll just give a few brief ways in which we can connect with our children. And again, this is all depending on the age and stage of your child, but anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes a day is often enough to fill their cup. And that can look like special time. So saying to your child, I want to sit down and play with you, or I want to do something with you for 15 minutes. I have 15 minutes right now. What can we do? What do you want to do? And it could be, maybe they want to read a book. Maybe they want you to play. Maybe they want you to tickle them. Maybe they want to run around outside, but filling their cup for 10, 15 minutes will help strengthen the bond between caregiver and child. And hopefully that will help when it comes to mealtime struggles. Okay, so the first cause is emotional relationships. The second is sensory problems. And this would be kids that have struggles with the way a food tastes, the textures, maybe they are overstimulated in whatever situation that they're at. So that could be, maybe there's too much food on their plate. Maybe there's too many items at the table. So a cup, a fork, a napkin, or maybe they're understimulated. Maybe it's not interesting enough. Maybe there needs to be a little bit more on their plate of food or more around them to interest them. So these could be sensory problems. The third cause could be oral motor development. And this would be where maybe, let's say, reflexes are not integrating fully. This could be issues with being able to properly lateralize the tongue to then eat safely. This could be things like insufficient practice. So kids that have not had enough practice with different types of foods, so purees of different textures, grabbing foods. Maybe they have poor lip closure, poor chewing skills, poor jaw strength, things like tongue ties, lip ties. All of those can cause the feeling of being unsafe to eat. And so that could be an issue. And one of the last ones that I really want to touch on, because this one is just, a can of worms that you could dive deep into, but these are health issues. And more often than not, picky eating is caused by a combination of health issues and relationship issues. So oftentimes parents will assume that picky eating is because a child simply doesn't want to eat a particular food. But our kids' bodies, they have this innate intelligence that if they're rejecting a particular category of food or gorging on a specific macronutrient, it could be because their body is intuitively telling them to. And so what are some health issues? Well, nutritional deficiencies, mineral imbalances. In particular, zinc is necessary for the production of stomach acid. So if there is a deficiency or a ratio imbalance in zinc, that could contribute to digestive symptoms. Also, zinc can worsen oral texture aversions. So kids that are avoiding meat or refusing meat many times can be related to zinc. It could be that there's an imbalance or a deficiency, something like that. Kids that are refusing, kids that are preferring specific textures like crunchy, starchy, snacky type foods. Again, that goes back to zinc. A lack or lack of stomach acid or limited stomach acid. And again, if you don't have enough stomach acid, then you can't properly break down proteins during the digestive process. And so that can lead to nutritional deficiencies. It can lead to a loss of taste for meat or create vulnerability to pathogens such as H. pylori, candida, fungal infections, like things like that. Gut dysbiosis is really big. That's when there's an imbalance of the good gut bacteria. And if we have an overgrowth of certain gut bacteria like candida, as I mentioned before, that can be something that causes kids to literally crave sugars, starches, artificial flavors and colors, and things like that. Leaky gut, heavy metals, they can disrupt mineral balances. They can create brain inflammation. So when it comes to health, and unfortunately in today's pretty toxic world that we live in, there's oftentimes picky eating is linked back to a nutritional deficiency, a mineral imbalance, one of these one of these issues. And then the last reason the last cause for picky eating could be delayed solids introduction. And what this means is baby was not offered solids until much later in their life. So maybe starting around 11 or 12 months or even after. And when you wait too long to introduce solids, there's a variety of foods and flavors and textures that there's a window and for opportune flavor and texture windows, and you miss that opportunity to offer those foods at that time. Now, you have essentially until the age of 3 when these opportunities are maximized for flavor and texture. So the brain is primed to receive signals for new textures, new flavors, things like that. But again, if we're delaying solids, then we're just like missing that optimal window. And you mentioned something about processed foods, which I do want to touch on, and just emphasize the fact that those foods were created in a lab and they are created specifically for the purpose to be addictive. So yes, your child is going to want to eat and prefer those foods because that's what they were designed to do. They were literally designed to turn on certain neurotransmitters in the brain and create an addiction to that food. And in the same way where it's incredibly difficult to break a drug addiction or a sugar addiction, that is the kind of work you're going to have to do to reverse it. So being aware of that. And this is why I say when it comes to picky eating, the methods that we use to prevent it are the same that we use to reverse it. And to prevent it, it is offering a wide variety of foods constantly in many different ways over and over and over and over again. And to reverse it, it's the same thing, but just starting much smaller. So if your child is only eating 5 things, it's offering a new food over and over and over again until their receptivity to variety opens up. And there is research that shows that kids need anywhere between 15 and 20 exposures to a food before they begin accepting it. So that means they have to see a food 15 to 20 times before they'll say, oh, okay, maybe I'm going to try this. And parents are only offering foods between 3 and 4 times before they give up. So as a parent, we're offering a certain type of food, 3 to 4 times, and then we say, oh my gosh, they didn't like it. They're never going to eat it again. And we give up. When in reality, you still have about 17 more times, approximately, to offer that food before your child is even going to say, oh yeah, I'll try it. Or, yeah, this isn't so bad.
That makes me, think. I wrote down a while ago the word patience on my pad here because it's just like so much in parenthood. It's about having patience, and we want results straight away, and we've got to be patient with it.
Yeah. And I think as our kids get older, also respecting their autonomy and their identity. So if I remember correctly, Gabriel is actually the same age as my oldest. And at that age, they're starting to really come into their likes and their dislikes. And if for a time they are claiming that they don't like X, Y, and Z food, then I believe as a parent, part of my job is to respect that and say, okay, all right, so you want to break from this right now. Is there a different way that I can serve it to you? Is there a different way that we can eat it? Or, okay, we won't eat this for a while, but we'll circle back and come back to it in maybe a month or so. I'm going to serve it again in a month. Or, like your son said, he only likes it in pate. I'm actually seeing kind of similar for my oldest as well. He's preferring pate over just plain cooked liver. That doesn't mean I don't stop serving it. I'm still serving it. And he might just choose to take one bite instead of 15. But yeah.
That makes sense. I wanted to just come back to something you were talking about, which is boundaries, and ask you how you feel about getting a balance between healthy and restrictive. So not being too restrictive, but, you know, we're mindful we don't want to restrict our kids from all of this stuff that's out there, because it is out there and it will be out there when they go out into the world on their own. But like you said, holding those boundaries is really very important too. And when Gabriel was very young, people who've listened to other episodes of the podcast will know he had some very persistent digestive problems, and we had to restrict his food a lot. And, you know, that was even in the house, not even going outside the house. I wondered your perspective on a balance between, you know, not restricting, controlling so much, because that can tip over into being something negative, but yet still being healthy and prioritizing nutrient-dense food.
I love this conversation. I think it's so complex and nuanced, and there is not a one answer fits for every person. So I think starting off with that, just knowing that I think deep within us, each of us knows what is the right balance in our own home. And it's almost impossible for me to say what that could look like for you or for Andrea, for any of our listeners. But I like to go back to the connection conversation again. When it comes to our choices, food choices, and especially I think of like surrounding family events and things like that, I think about, is the time with these family members more important and more valuable than me worrying about what is being served? And if I think that it is, then I will oftentimes let go. Does that mean I'm not doing other things to try and keep that balance, like you said, Alison? Definitely. So some strategies that I do in my own home are, I will 9 times out of 10 feed my kids a full meal before we go anywhere where I know there's going to be external food. So I'll make sure that they're full, so they're not starving, staring at all of these highly enticing, you know, processed options in front of them. We talk a lot in our family about the importance of protein. And so my kids know that, okay, if I'm going somewhere where, you know, maybe the food options aren't going to be the best, what am I going to focus on? I'm going to focus on protein. I'm going to try and eat the protein. And so, you know, they know that. As a family, one of our family food values is absolutely no artificial colors, no matter what. So like, they're very aware of that. And, you know, they are now at the age where they can see if something is brightly colored and will avoid it. And I think that really having the hard part is having these conversations to where we're also not villainizing other families. And because, you know, these are choices that we've made, but that doesn't mean that another family's choices are less than ours. They're just different. And these are what matters to us. And this is what we're going to stick with. And we're going to respect other people despite, even if they do things differently. And I do think that in today's world, with our obsession over health and wellness, and honestly, the overwhelming saturation of information constantly, it is really easy to just go down a slippery slope of, you can't have this, you can't have that, you can't have that. So I think choosing your battles, setting up strategies that work for your family. I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing your own food to places. Personally, we live in a world where everybody has some form of food intolerance. Nowadays, it's just like so common to hear someone say, oh, okay, I can't have it because I'm gluten-free or I'm dairy-free or I'm nut-free. You know, there's always something that someone is free of. So oftentimes I don't think it's that big of a deal to just bring your own food. And I will almost always offer to bring my own food. That way I know at least my kids they have the option of eating something that I have brought. And I feel fine with that. And the last one is just, I think that if we are really focused in our own home, then the occasional outside food is not going to cause that much of a problem in the grand scheme of things. And, you know, every person is in a different situation. I'm blessed that my kids eat 3 square meals at home every week, you know, a day. So it's not very often that they're being exposed to outside foods.
That's really helpful. I feel like your first comment, I think it was your first comment, where you said, you know, each of us has a different situation, and somewhere deep inside, each of us knows what the right answer is, you know, which will change from day to day to day, but the right balance between restriction and not over controlling. If we can be still enough and feel inside ourselves, we have the answers there. It's so easy to think that we're underinformed and we need to go out and listen to what everyone else is saying. But for questions like that, there's a feeling inside us. And I think that's it's I love your attitude, because you're empowering mothers and fathers and caregivers, which is wonderful.
Thank you.
So you have a course that you offer to parents around this. Can you talk to us about that and the other offerings, if you have any other offerings that people listening might be interested in diving deeper with you?
Yes. So I have 2 courses. The first is for any parents that are transitioning over from a standard American diet to a more nutrient-dense ancestral foods diet. And this is for anyone who is just not sure what to cook at the beginning, what foods to stock their fridge and pantry with. They want a little bit of basics of nutrition, so to understand what are some of the important macronutrients and why, and also how to manage some of the difficult situations that we were just talking about. I have an entire module on how to manage those situations. And so that's one course, and it's on my website. It's called Real Food, Real Families. And then the second one is it's my passion project, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. It's starting solids with baby. And I did this one with a pediatric occupational feeding specialist. And she essentially talked about the OT side, developmental side of feeding babies. So all about oral motor development. We go into the difference between gagging and choking, which, we didn't touch on here, but we dive deep into the difference between gagging and choking, because that's one of parents' biggest fears when it comes to starting solids. We talk about, obviously, the nutritional aspect. So what are those nutrients? What do we need to be feeding baby? What does that look like in a practical setting? And it also gives tons of resources with what are my favorite feeding utensils? What are, some of our favorite feeding schedules for some of the more type A parents out there? And that course is called Nurtured Foundations. It's also on my website, and it has an accompanying ebook to go with it. And the ebook is broken up into months and developmental stages for baby. And I like to say that all of the recipes in that book can be applied to any age, really. So even if you have a 3-year-old, you can purchase that book, and there's still wonderful recipes in there that you can feed your 3-year-old or your 8-year-old, whatever age you have. And so, those are some of the offerings that I have.
What's your website? Where can people go and look at those?
Yeah, my website is nourishthelittles.com. And I have a link on there to work with me if this is something that you want more support on. And the courses are on there as well.
So you do one-on-one consulting as well, one-on-one help?
I do, yes. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. And as you said at the beginning, your podcast is Modern Ancestral Mamas. Are you anywhere else if people want to connect with you in other places as well?
I'm not very good at social media. I'm mostly just on Instagram. I do have, I'm sorry about the dogs. I do have an email list. But no, mostly Instagram and my website.
What's your Instagram?
It is Nourish the Littles.
Okay, the same as your website.
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm usually at this point, I say to Andrea, do you want to ask anything else? And I know that she's going to come back and say yes, 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 but we've gone over time. Thank you ever so much for your just so much wisdom, so much experience, and shared so succinctly. Thank you ever so much, Christine.
Oh, Alison, this was such a pleasure. I love chatting with you and Andrea, and I'm honored that you guys decided to have me back on. So thank you.
Andrea, do you want to jump in with anything?
Just want to say this will all be so helpful for our audience. I know you hit on so many things that they have questions about, and they will put everything you said to good use. So super thankful that you came on today.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
Me too. Thank you ever so much, Christine. Bye for now.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Alison's at ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.